Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories. I hadn't been in the attic since Martin died. It wasn't that I was avoiding it on purpose, at least not consciously. But life has a way of narrowing your focus when grief settles in. You move through the days with just enough momentum to keep going. Wash the dishes, water the plants, pay the bills, remember to breathe. Anything beyond that feels like too much. But on that Sunday afternoon, the quiet inside the house felt different. Not heavy, just restless. A kind of stillness that made you want to open a window or move something out of place. So I found myself standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, holding a flashlight and an old utility knife, telling myself it was finally time. It had been 6 years since Martin passed. A heart attack in his sleep. No warning. One day he was there, brewing his coffee and humming under his breath. The next, I was staring at an empty mug and a hollow morning. 23 years of marriage reduced to a final silence. The attic door creaked open like something out of a ghost story. Dust drifted through the air in lazy spirals. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each step groaning beneath my weight, as if the house itself remembered. At the top, the familiar smell hit me. Old wood, mothballs, a hint of lavender from a sachet I must have stored up here a decade ago. The light from the small round window wasn't strong, but it was enough to make out the shapes of boxes, stacks of books, a forgotten fan, and the antique trunk we'd brought from Martin's mother's home after she passed. That's where I found it. The shoebox. It was tucked in the back corner of the trunk, wrapped in one of Martin's old flannel shirts, the green one he wore when he mowed the lawn or went fishing. My chest tightened as I pulled it free. I hadn't seen that shirt in years, and for a moment, the feel of it in my hands was too much. I sat down right there on the attic floor, cross-legged like a child, holding something that felt sacred. The shoebox wasn't taped, just folded shut. No labels. No dust, oddly, like it had been placed there recently, though I knew that couldn't be true. Inside, a stack of photographs, some concert stubs, a worn paperback book with the cover missing. And, on top of it all, a letter. My name on the front, Eliza. Written in Martin's handwriting. Strong, neat, familiar. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, let my fingers trace the curves of the letters, as if I could touch him again through the paper. The date in the top corner stopped me cold. 3 weeks before he died. I blinked, my pulse suddenly louder in my ears. Why hadn't I ever seen this? Why had he hidden it? A dozen thoughts rushed through me. Fear, curiosity, something like hope. I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever was inside. But even then, sitting alone in the shadows of our shared past, I knew. This letter was about to change everything I thought I knew about the man I married. And maybe about myself, too. I sat there for a long time with the letter in my lap. The attic had grown colder since I first came up, but I didn't notice until the draft from the tiny window nudged a lock of hair across my cheek. Still, I didn't move. The shoebox sat open beside me, its contents untouched now, photos and mementos that suddenly felt like artifacts of a life I didn't entirely recognize. I unfolded the letter carefully, afraid it might tear. The paper was thick, the edges slightly curled. His handwriting was clean, deliberate, as if he had taken his time with every word. Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to hand it to you myself. I've rewritten this letter more times than I can count, but no version has ever felt right. I suppose some things never do. Asterisk. I paused, already feeling the prick of tears behind my eyes. I hadn't heard Martin's voice in years, but there it was, in every sentence, careful, thoughtful, weighed down with the kind of gentleness he always used when he was about to tell me something hard. There's something I've carried for most of my life, long before you and I met. A truth I never quite knew how to share with anyone, not even you. And God, I wanted to. There were so many moments when I almost said something, but I always pulled back, afraid you'd look at me differently, afraid I'd lose the life we built. I swallowed hard, my pulse slowing with the weight of every word. Before you, I loved someone. His name was Andrew. I stopped reading. My hands lowered slightly, and the attic went quiet again. oppressively so, as if even the shadows were holding their breath. A ringing silence filled my ears. Not from shock, exactly, but from recognition. Something deep inside me, something wordless, stirred. Martin had never spoken of anyone before me. There were no high school stories, no casual mentions of old girlfriends, let alone boyfriends. I had never thought to question it. He was simply private, and I respected that. I didn't realize how much of his silence I had mistaken for simplicity. I brought the letter closer again. Andrew and I were young. We met at university, you know, the one I told you about but never really talked about? That's why. That's where it happened. He was electric.
Bright.
He made me feel alive in a way I didn't know how to explain back then. But we were scared. It was the early 80s, and the world wasn't kind to two men in love. We lasted almost 3 years, on and off. When it ended, I told myself it was for the best. I told myself I'd forget, move on, build something stable. And then I met you. I read those words again and again. And then I met you. Tears slid down my cheeks without warning. Not out of pain. Not yet. But because something inside me recognized the truth in those words and the struggle beneath them. You gave me peace, Eliza. You gave me laughter, comfort, purpose. You gave me a life I never thought I'd be allowed to have. And I loved you. I loved you with everything I had. That was never the lie. But I was never just one thing. I never stopped being the man who loved Andrew. I just tried to bury him. I pressed the letter to my chest, closing my eyes. My breath trembled. I felt Martin in the room with me. Not in some ghostly sense, but in memory, in presence, in the echo of his words that refused to fade. I should have felt betrayed.
Confused. Angry.
But I didn't. I felt sad for him. For the part of him that had to hide. For the version of our marriage that had lived in only one color, when it could have been painted in so many more. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eliza. There's nothing to forgive. I just want you to know who I really was, because you deserve the truth. You always did. I hope, when you think of me, you can hold space for all of me, even the parts one couldn't show you in time. Love always, Martin. I folded the letter slowly and held it in my hands for a while longer, like it might warm itself back into life. He had loved me, and he had also loved someone else, a man I'd never known existed. Both loves were real. Both had shaped him. And now, finally, they had shaped me too. I stood up slowly, knees stiff from sitting so long, the shoebox in my hands. The attic seemed a little lighter now, as though some hidden burden had lifted itself off the beams and floorboards. Downstairs, the kettle whistled faintly, a reminder that life was still happening, still moving. And I knew, as I took one last look at the folded letter in my palm, that something had opened inside me. Not a wound. A window. The house felt different after the letter. Not in a way that could be seen, but in the way air feels heavier before a storm, charged, waiting. I moved through the rooms like someone visiting their own life. Every object felt newly unfamiliar, reframed in the light of a truth I hadn't known I was missing. Martin's sweater, still folded in the bottom drawer. His coffee mug, chipped on the rim, tucked at the back of the cabinet. A photo of us at the lake, arms around each other, smiling into the sun, now tinged with a softness I hadn't noticed before. I didn't know what to do with the letter. Part of me wanted to keep it close, read it again and again until it felt less like a wound and more like a gift. Another part wanted to tuck it back in the box and leave it there, like a whispered secret meant only for that quiet space beneath the eaves. Instead, I slipped it into the drawer of my nightstand. Not hidden, not displayed.
Just there.
That afternoon, I took a walk. It was late October. The leaves had begun their slow descent into gold and rust, carpeting the sidewalks with a crunch that matched the rhythm of my steps. I walked past the bakery Martin loved, the bookstore where we used to spend rainy Saturdays. The world looked exactly the same, but I felt like someone watching it from behind a glass wall. I found myself at the park. The one with the old wooden benches, the duck pond, the crooked willow tree that leaned like it had grown tired of standing straight. I sat on the bench closest to the water, pulled my scarf tighter around my neck, and tried to steady the swirl of thoughts in my head. I wasn't angry with Martin. Not really. I thought I might be. But the truth was, I understood him more now than I ever had when he was alive. I knew what it was to tuck pieces of yourself into corners. I'd done it too. Not because I had something to hide, but because life often teaches women to make space for others before themselves. I had played the role of the steady wife, the patient listener, the keeper of routines. But there were versions of me I'd left behind long ago, a younger woman who once painted, who once dreamed of living by the sea. We had both made compromises. We had both edited ourselves to fit the life we chose. Maybe that was what love was, not perfection, but the quiet agreement to keep showing up for each other, even in the silence. I watched a young couple walk past, their hands loosely entwined, their laughter carried on the wind. I wondered what truths they were still holding close, what secrets had yet to surface, what small acts of bravery would one day be required of them. A part of me wanted to meet Andrew, to see the man who had shaped my husband in ways I never knew. But I didn't know how to find him, or even if I should. What would I say? He loved you.
But he chose me.
And I loved him, too, all the way to the end. As I sat there, lost in thought, an older man passed by and nodded at me politely. There was nothing remarkable about the moment, and yet, for some reason, it made me ache. It reminded me how much of life passes quietly, how many things we never say. When I returned home, the late sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. I made tea, my hand steady, my breath slower. Something in me had begun to settle. Not fully, but enough. Later, I opened the trunk again. Not for the letter, but for the photographs. I sifted through them one by one. Martin fishing with his brother, Martin holding our cat, Martin mid-laugh at a barbecue. And then one I hadn't seen before, a photo of him in his 20s, sitting cross-legged on a campus lawn, a book in his lap, and a stranger beside him. They weren't touching, but there was something in the way they looked at each other. Something unspoken. Something unmistakable. I turned the photo over. In Martin's handwriting, faint and smudged. Me and A. Fall 84. Andrew. I held the photo to my chest and closed my eyes. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about regret. It was about knowing the whole story, finally. And in that moment, I made a quiet decision. I was going to try and find him. I didn't act on the decision right away. The idea of finding Andrew lingered like steam on a mirror, present, but unclear. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't even know if he was still alive. Martin hadn't left any clues about how to find him. No last name in the letter. Just Andrew. A first name that suddenly meant everything, and yet gave me so little to hold on to. But curiosity has a way of blooming in the quiet. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to the attic again, not because I expected to find more, but because it felt like the last place Martin had truly spoken to me. I combed through every item in that shoebox. Ticket stubs. A university pennant. An old postcard from Boston. Nothing with a return address. Nothing that gave me a concrete lead. Until I found the yearbook. It wasn't in the box. It was in the trunk itself, under a layer of worn-out notebooks. The cover was cracked along the spine, but the gold lettering still read Class of '86, Northridge University. Martin's alma mater. I flipped through the pages slowly, stopping now and then at familiar glimpses of his younger self. His hair was longer, his eyes softer. He always had a quiet charm, but in these photos, he looked alive in a way I hadn't seen before. And then, on page 112, the Philosophy Club. A small, grainy photo of 7 students seated on stone steps. Martin, second from the left, smiling. And next to him, a man with dark hair, dimples, and a hand resting casually on his knee. A hand that nearly touched Martin's. Andrew C. Whitmore. My heart leapt. I didn't recognize the name, but now I had one. A full one. I stared at the photo for a long time, as if it might offer more if I looked hard enough. There was something in their closeness. The ease of it. The way Martin's shoulder angled ever so slightly toward him. Back downstairs, I opened my laptop. A search brought up a few false leads: academics, artists, an obituary from Alabama, not him, thank God. But then, one result stood out. An Andrew C. Whitmore,
Writer.
Lives in Massachusetts. A handful of essays published in small literary journals. One with a short bio: Andrew C. Whitmore lives quietly in Vermont, where he teaches creative writing and walks his dog, Theo. Vermont. Just a few hours from where I sat. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My hand hovered over the mouse. My breath felt shallow. Was it really him? I found the contact form on the website. Just a name, email, and message box. My fingers hovered over the keys.
What could I possibly say? Hello.
You don't know me, but I'm the widow of Martin Harper. He wrote you a love letter once, and now I've found it in my attic. I think you might have been the man he never forgot.
No.
It wasn't just about finding Andrew anymore. It was about how I wanted to meet him and why. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote a letter. By hand. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Martin and I had played cards, opened bills, talked about nothing and everything. The sun spilled across the wood as I picked up my pen and began. Dear Andrew, I don't know if this letter will reach the right person, but I hope it does. My name is Eliza Harper. I was married to Martin. He passed away 6 years ago, and recently, I found something he left behind, a letter. In it, he mentioned you. I believe you were someone important to him. Someone he loved. I'm not writing to disrupt your life or to dredge up old wounds. I think there are things worth acknowledging. And I would like to meet you, if you'd be open to it. There is no agenda. Just honesty. And perhaps some peace to be shared between us. Kindly, Eliza. I mailed it the next morning. No return address, just my phone number at the bottom. And then I waited. Each day passed with a rhythm of quiet anticipation. I tried to go about life as usual: grocery runs, laundry, pruning the hydrangeas out back. But there was a part of me that buzzed with nervous energy, like a radio just slightly out of tune. By the fourth day, I had almost convinced myself he wouldn't reply. That I had imagined too much into a photograph, a name, a memory, not even mine. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, just for a breath, and answered. Hello. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, gentle and cautious. Is this Eliza Harper? I closed my eyes.
Yes.
Speaking. Another pause. A deep breath. This is Andrew. His voice was exactly what I didn't expect, and exactly what I needed.
Soft.
Measured. Not fragile, but careful. Like someone walking into a room where they weren't sure they were welcome. I stepped away from the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear, my other hand bracing against the wall, as if the call itself needed to be steadied. Thank you for calling, I said, my voice quiet. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, he admitted. But when I saw your name and his, he trailed off. I didn't push. I just listened. I read your letter 3 times, he continued. It took me a while to believe it was real. I haven't heard Martin's name spoken aloud in years. I smiled gently, even though he couldn't see it. I think he wanted you to be remembered, I said, even if he couldn't do it while he was alive. There was a long pause, filled only by the soft buzz of the phone line and the faint hum of my refrigerator. Then Andrew spoke again, his voice quieter than before. I'd like to meet you, if you're still open to it. I exhaled. Slowly. Fully.
Yes.
I am. We agreed on a small cafe halfway between our towns. Quiet, tucked beside a lake, the kind of place where no one was in a hurry. I spent the days leading up to it in a strange fog of nerves and clarity. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. I only knew I had to walk toward it. When I arrived, he was already there. He stood when he saw me, and I knew him instantly, even though I had never met him. It was in the posture, the eyes, the way he held his hands, like someone who had once loved deeply and carried the proof in his palms. Andrew? I said softly as I approached. Eliza, he nodded, his voice thick with something like disbelief. You look just as I imagined. We shook hands, then paused, both of us unsure if something more, a hug, a smile, a word was needed. In the end, we just sat. The server brought us tea. Neither of us drank right away. I took him in, his face weathered but elegant, the lines around his eyes deep but kind. His hair had gone almost fully gray, and he wore a navy sweater with worn cuffs.
There was something grounded about him.
No artifice. No performance. Just presence. I don't know where to start, I confessed. You don't have to, he replied. I think just being here it's enough. But I wanted more. And so did he. So we talked. At first, it was slow, facts, timelines, gentle sketches of the men we both loved. We filled in spaces the other hadn't seen. I told him about Martin's laugh when he was half asleep, his habit of whistling while folding laundry, the way he'd leave small notes on the fridge when he went out. Andrew smiled. He did that in college, too. Except his notes were usually reminders to buy milk or record the football game. He paused. He hated football. We laughed.
Softly.
Tenderly. And then we dug deeper. Andrew told me about their years together. The late-night walks through campus, the hidden letters slipped under dorm doors, the fear of being found out. He spoke of love in its purest, most cautious form, stolen glances, long silences, words that meant everything and couldn't be spoken aloud. We were young, he said. But it was real. I've spent my life trying to explain that to myself. That it mattered, even if it ended. I reached across the table, instinctively, and touched his hand. Just a brush. But it was enough. He never stopped caring you, I said. He didn't say it until the end. But it was always there. I see that now. Andrew's eyes filled. He didn't cry. Neither did I. But grief sat between us, not heavy, not painful, just present. Like an old photograph you can't bear to put away. We stayed for over 2 hours. The sky outside grew pale with evening. The tea had long since gone cold. When we stood to leave, we didn't say goodbye right away. I don't know what this meeting was supposed to be, I said honestly. Closure? Connection? Something else. Maybe all of it, he replied. Or maybe just two people honoring what was never allowed to be honored. We stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the lake. Would it be all right, he asked, if we kept in touch? I smiled. I'd like that. As we went our separate ways, I looked back once. He did, too. Two people tethered by love they hadn't shared, but both had been shaped by. And in that strange, impossible intersection, we had both found something neither of us had known we were missing. Permission. To remember.
To speak.
To move forward. It's strange how something so small, a single letter in a forgotten box, can change the way you understand an entire life. It had been 3 months since I met Andrew at the cafe by the lake, and yet the memory of that day felt as vivid as if it had happened only yesterday. We kept in touch, just as we said we would. Not often, not urgently, but meaningfully. Sometimes it was a short call, a text, a photo of a familiar place from his youth or one of his dogs sleeping in the sun. Other times it was a silence we both allowed, the kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence but rest. I didn't tell many people about Andrew. Not because I was hiding him, but because there are some truths that aren't meant to be explained, only felt. And besides, this part of Martin's life wasn't a secret anymore. It was just sacred. I'd begun writing again. Nothing formal. Just journal entries, really. Little scenes from my memory, moments I never thought to write down until now. Martin's laugh echoing in the hallway, the way he used to hum while waiting for toast, the way he'd rest his hand on my back at dinner parties, grounding me without words. And sometimes, I wrote about things I hadn't seen but now could imagine. 2 young men walking hand in hand beneath the moonlight, their fingers trembling, hearts louder than the silence between them. One afternoon in early spring, I drove back to the lake. The same cafe, the same wooden bench outside, the same wind gently shifting the surface of the water. I sat with a new letter in my coat pocket. One I hadn't planned to write until it demanded to exist. This one was for Martin. Not a response. Not a confrontation. Just a reply. Martin, I understand now. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know you were more than what you allowed yourself to be, and more than what I ever saw. You loved me, and I loved you. That remains untouched. But you also loved someone else. And that doesn't undo our story.
It completes it.
I wish you had told me. Not because I needed to know, but because you deserved to be known.
Fully.
And now you are. You were never less of a husband. You were just more of a man than I realized. I forgive the silence. I hold the truth. And I let you go, whole. Yours, Eliza. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't bury it under a tree or send it into the wind like some symbolic gesture. I simply folded it neatly and placed it inside the pages of his old yearbook between the photo of the philosophy club and a page where he'd written his favorite quote. To love and be loved is to feel the sun from both sides. I smiled. I stood at the edge of the water for a while, letting the wind tug at the ends of my coat. Geese floated across the lake in lazy arcs. A dog barked in the distance. Children laughed somewhere behind me, their voices rising like birds. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I had learned that love isn't linear. It doesn't follow neat timelines or stay confined to boxes. It leaves fingerprints in quiet places. It returns when you least expect it. And sometimes, the people we love most carry entire stories inside them we'll never fully read, but we can still honor them for writing them. I took one last look at the lake, then turned and walked back toward the parking lot, the sun warm on my back, the silence inside me no longer empty. It was full of truth, of memory, of peace.